So my wife got in the car, put her foot on the clutch, it went to the floor and wouldn't come up. So due to a bunch of odd circumstances, I find myself at 7:22 in the morning going to get parts so that I can get this done and we can bring a friend to go see the Kennedy Space Center. I, for the record, am a night owl. This is like the middle of the night, look at it. Alright, anyway, I'm out of here. So there are other videos on this, so I'm going to add mine to the mix just because sometimes it's good to have more than one reference. But for the record, I went to Scotty Kilmer's YouTube channel, I think that's what it's called, and fortunately he likes Toyotas, just to diagnose this. So, he also missed some steps. Step 1, as always, turn on some music. Step 2, get a prop rod for the hood because cheap parts. Step 4, get angry because there's a big truck in the neighborhood doing stuff when I want to film, which is pretty typical. Alright, you can see that it's actually leaking down there, so looks like it got a little bit worse, but this is the offensive part and it's coming out, and you can see the first thing you do is you crack this line right there where my finger is pointing at, and step 5 or 6 or whatever, I've already lost track of the steps, is way back there on the firewall. It's hard to see it down there. Are 2 bolts that are apparently threaded from inside, so I have to go under the dash, which is always fun. And disconnect that and disconnect it from the linkage. So we'll just do step 5 right now. Crack that. Okay, you gotta love this step, right? So I'm gonna go in there and crack that, right? Here we go. Any second now. Just stick that on there like that. Here we go. No, can't quite get the angle. Hang on. Maybe I can get it down here where, yeah, that's it. No, maybe, like this. No, almost, nope. Okay, maybe if I approach it from here. No. Fuck. So there's the guy making all the noise. You're just gonna have to put up with it. I don't have all day to do this repair. I think I managed to get on it this way. I used a smaller wrench and I barely got on it, and now I'm gonna push and hopefully it will come loose. And I'll hurt myself in the process. Okay, that worked. Alright, I finally got it off. And you can see that there is paper towel under there. You should put something under there to catch the fluid if you can, because it eats the paint away pretty readily. So now next step is to get these 2 bolts off in the back and disconnect it from, I don't know if I'd disconnect it from the linkage or not. We'll see. Mr. Noisemaker went away and he invited his buddy to take his place. Okay, so now what in the actual Okay, and because nothing can be easy, here are the 2 bolts you need to remove. That one there, not so bad, and one from hell way up under there somewhere that I can't even see from here. Okay, so this is the one thing that's gonna make this job really hard. The other nut, I can't see the camera. Okay, there's my finger. My finger is going to go on the nut now. It's behind this bracket, and I've got my finger on it, the tip of my finger on it now. It's way up under there, which doesn't give me a whole lot of room here to get anything on it. I can't even see it, I can't feel it, so yeah, this is going to be very unpleasant. So now that the tree service people have come and the recycle guys have come, the lawn guys have showed up now, so it's always nice and loud here. I'd like to point out that I think it's a little bit easier if you push the clutch pedal. Sorry for all the moving around here, I'm cramped under here. If you push the clutch pedal in, I think it gets out of the way a little bit. And It's behind here. Oh, I gotta move it. I'm sorry for all the shaking. It's behind there. I can't get my hand in. You have to do it by feel. Then you just easily pull it out. Real easy. Okay, the next step is to remove this pin right there so that this part is removed from this part and you can pull it out. This is a pin, it's the head of the pin. There's a clip that holds the pin on, and of course it's on the other side. If I can, when I reinstall, I'm going to put it in from the other side so I can get it out next time easier. Alright, I'm having trouble getting the camera up in there. I'm not sure I can. My eyes are too close to this little screen to see if it's on there. I'm going to move it around a little bit and I'll show you the pin. I'll put an arrow on it in the video. I got my hands full right now, so I'm just going to try and reach up there. One thing I can say is I think I've done this before, and if I've done this before, then I'm pretty sure you can't put that pin in the other way around, because I would have done that. This guy was literally standing in my garage a second ago, like 5 feet from me. What are the chances? I'm going to go to Kennedy Space Center all day. It'll probably be a super quiet neighborhood. Alright, so as usual, I can see it. I can put my fingers on it. It looks like I got plenty of access, but of course, I can't get pliers on it. I tried every needle nose I have. Well, not every one. I got a couple more here. I'm going to give it another try. Okay, welcome to my life. I just pulled the clip out. Here's the pin, right? That's what it looks like. And I just pulled the clip out. So it must be here somewhere, right? Some leaves, got a couple of the nuts that I pulled off. I'll just get that tool out of the way, and that tool out of the way, and that tool out of the way, and there we go. And here we go, and I'll get rid of that, and that. It's all in the way. I can't see what I'm doing here, right? So there we go. Here it is. Anybody see a clip in this? No clips anywhere. Ay, ay, ay. Maybe I have to yell over the noise, but when I push the clutch in, you can see it squirted the fluid there, and there, and there, and there, and there, and there. So, learn from my mistakes. Stick something over this hole before you do that. So, the next step after losing the clip is to pull this out, which I'm sure it'll come out really easy now. Just gently pull that out, no problem. Just wiggle it a little, you know, give it a little force. Sure, it'll come out eventually. Alright, after losing the pin and getting brake fluid all over the engine bay, the next step is to compare the new part to the old part. And as you can see, they look pretty close. The next thing I'm going to do is, this is the clutch adjustment right here. And it was pretty good, I think, the way it was. So I'm going to, and in fact, based on the number of threads, I think what I need to do is really measure from here to here. And I'll go ahead and make that measurement, but it looks pretty good right now, so I'll just stick it on and then make the measurement, stick it back in the hole, and reverse the process. Find the clip. Alright, so if you're a complete noob, I'm going to measure from here to here, and then from here to here, and make sure that this one is the same as that one. And important to note, when you put two nuts on a bolt or threaded member, then they'll want to lock. And this essentially is a nut. So that's what happens. This comes to there, and then when you tighten this down, it doesn't want to spin off. Okay, a minor correction. You really don't want to measure from here to there. What you want to do is measure from, so we also, it helps to know where this thing is, where this part is relative to in here, if it's pushed in or pulled out or whatever. Fortunately, I don't think it's in that bad a shape, so I'm just going to pull it all the way out, basically. And you should measure from this hole to maybe here, to some reference point. I'm thinking right here, because this part here could be longer on this one, and even though you got it right here, the distance from the pedal to the piston could be different, so that's what you're really worried about. So there it is. So this is just as hard to get back in as it was to get out. Actually, harder. See down in there that I can't get my hands on it, and you know, you could put it on afterward, I suppose, under the dash, but I mean, working under the dash is even harder, right? So I just have to wrestle with this. Found my clip. So I want to point out something so it doesn't happen to you, and this could be on any car. This wire here was here when I pushed that through the hole, and I couldn't get it out because it was held by this. It was held by the, you know, the stud. So I had to pull it back out, move this wire outside, and then put it in the hole. So just be careful when you're putting it, you don't pinch any of these wires, because then it's so hard to get it back in the hole again. I put the nut on the end of the socket, and I tried to thread it in there, and of course it fell off, and it fell into the most inaccessible place on the car as usual. So this time what I've done is, you can see a little bit of blue there. I put some blue tape on there to make that a snug fit, so I can thread it up behind there and try and get this thing on. Okay, here's another thing to be aware of. That part right there is a little pad, and it goes between the metal on the clutch. There's a little metal flange on the clutch pedal, and it goes on there, and I guess it kind of cushions the blow between the clutch pedal and the clutch switch. I'll show you that here. Okay, here is the clutch start switch. When I depress the clutch, it goes in and it knows it can start the car. You can't see it, but on the back side of this metal plate here is a place for that little pad I just showed you, and it goes in between the two, kind of cushions the blow. If you look carefully right up here, you'll see one for the clutch being released, I guess. I'm not really sure what that one's for. If that pad comes off, when you depress the clutch, the metal plate will not come in contact with this, won't push in, and it won't let you start the car. These things get brittle over time and they break, and in fact there's one on the brake switch as well, and if it crumbles and falls off, your brake lights come on and they don't go off, and you can like drain your battery. So it's a good idea when you're doing this job to get more of those little pads. I'm pretty sure they're probably only available at Toyota. In my case, I'm not doing that. I don't have time for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to, I don't know, put something on there in between to make up the distance until I can get one of those little pads. But that's really kind of important on this job, so I'm glad I pointed that out. Okay, so the next step is to pull the little plastic protective thing off, which I see has already fallen off because I didn't take that off. And you install that, tighten it back down. It's very important not to cross thread it. It's easy to do because this this line puts pressure on it in one direction or the other. Okay, so I tightened that up. There are 3 steps left to finish this process. 1 is to fill the reservoir. 2 is to bleed the system by having somebody, just like you would with brakes, you have somebody pressing the clutch, you let the air, you open up the valve, let the air out, tighten it, release the clutch, so on. Then the last step would be to fix that little pad I told you about, otherwise the car is not going to start. However, I've decided in order to solve this problem, and while the fluid is all out of the clutch system, or at least mostly, I'm going to go ahead and change the clutch slave cylinder. It's right here. Never say easy out loud, serious, not until the job's done. But I left this one for last because theoretically you just disconnect that line, those 2 bolts, pull it off, put the new one on, put it all back together, then do the bleeding procedure I mentioned a second ago. Then just these 2 bolts right here. So then just reach in and remove it. And drop the bolt. Can't believe that bolt didn't fall into the least accessible spot on the engine. Must be my lucky day. Alright. And as usual, you compare the two parts, make sure they look the same. It looks pretty good. It comes with a new one of these. So that goes inside there and then sticks out kind of like that. Not sure why it doesn't just come in there already. I don't think there's any grease. I'll open it up and check. Okay, so there it is installed. The only hard part is you have to make sure you get the pin thing, plunger, into the socket, and you'll have to compress it in a little bit. It wants to spring back out, but it's not too bad. It'll stick at first, so once you get it like that, you can move it close enough so that the two bolts can go in. There's no need to torque those to like crazy foot-pounds. I usually use a torque wrench on every single nut and bolt I can get a torque wrench onto, which means, you know, nearly none of them. The only thing I can stress on this job that's really important is the connections to fluid connections, like here and on the other end. Like I said, you should put those in as far as you can with your hands. That way you can feel if it's cross-threading. If it is, it shouldn't really go anymore. It'll get tight on your finger tight. But if you use a wrench on it, you could force it through that. So you should go as far as you can, and wiggling this line at the same time, if you can get both hands on it to do that, is a good way to make sure it's going in straight. You can actually feel it move when you wiggle. It'll tighten a little more, you'll wiggle some more, and then it'll tighten some more, and so on, until you kind of can't go any further, and then you use wrenches. And I try and use this brake wrench, this special brake wrench here. It's designed for those so it doesn't mess up those lines. In my case, it was too long, so I had to use this 10mm for most of it, but I was able to do the final tightening with this. That's my recommendation. So, next step is to add fluid and bleed the system, and you bleed it by loosening this bleeder screw right there. I hope you can see it's kind of dark down in there. There's a little rubber booty on it. You take that off, and then you loosen it, and somebody steps on the brakes and air should come out, and then you tighten it and they release the brake, the clutch in this case, and you keep doing that. The clutch will probably go to the floor and stick, so the person doing it may have to pull it back out again until you get enough fluid in. Okay, so when we bled it, the pedal went all the way to the floor and would stick. So I had her do that. I had her push it all the way to the floor, let it stick, and I would close the valve, and then she'd have to pull it up by hand. All this was done essentially by hand until, and I just heard a little whoosh of air. And at first it didn't look like the fluid level was coming down at all, so I was just wondering if nothing was happening, but we kept going, and eventually I could hear it gurgle, and eventually fluid did come out, and that started dropping. So I added more fluid. You have to keep your eye on the fluid, make sure it doesn't get too low. And she just kept going, and then when I started not seeing any more bubbles coming out, what I did was when she was pushing the clutch in, I would shut the valve real quick partly on the way down, so that it didn't go all the way to the bottom and stick. And that way, I know I caught her when she was definitely on the downstroke, and there was no chance of it kind of pulling air back into the system because it was still in the process of pushing out, right? And I did that a few times at the end, and she said the pedal would come up about halfway, or it'd come up like really slowly. But then I had her pump it up a little bit, and it started feeling normal, and I could see the actuation down here. So I did that a few more times just to make sure that we had the fluid all the way through, and I think it's good to go now. So I'm going to try and clean up the engine compartment a little bit, and while I'm here, I'm going to make a t-shirt that says that, while I'm here, I'm going to, I checked this and it's a little bit low, like maybe a quart, maybe 3/4 of a quart, something like that. So I'm going to add some oil as well, and then I have to solve my pad problem. The pad I mentioned before, this little pad here, that's broken. I'll use that for thickness, and I'll probably grab some kind of a piece of metal and just sort of tape it in place for now until I can get a new pad at Toyota, just so we can get the car running. And that'll be it. So these are the problems you might encounter if you do this job. A lot of guys, like even Scotty Kilmer, was like, oh, undo these bolts, pull it out. Take this off, pull it out. And what they fail to show you is how hard it is to take those bolts off and pull it out. Well, now I've just shown you, and at least that's how I do things. And I'm really happy to say I didn't even have any extra bolts left over at the end this time. So I'm definitely making improvements. So I cut this little piece of metal. It's pretty much the same thickness as the pad, and I'm gonna duct tape it on the clutch pedal. Not my favorite method, but it only has to last until I can get to the dealership tomorrow or later today even and get a new pad. Okay, all done. Time to go see some astronauts. Alright, so that's about it. You just have to check for leaks, and in my case, that little rod I was measuring out, I had to make that a little bit longer because the clutch was engaging a little too close to the floor. Kennedy Space Center was awesome, as always. It's getting kind of commercialized. I think they always want you to buy stuff, you know, and I refuse, you know, to buy anything when I'm there. So, Corolla content. I know I had to inject yet another video in front of it, but I am making one. So I'm definitely working on the Corolla, but it's not quite a full video yet, so it's not ready for prime time, but it will be coming soon. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope this helps somebody.